Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is Under, Down, Under, exploring Tasmania, lutruwita. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab expedition leader, Nikki Sentinella. Nikki, thank you so much for being here today. I cannot wait to join you down under for the next hour. Let's dive in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and welcome everyone. It's great to see a few of you here. Going to come on this bit of an exploration through Tasmania, lutruwita, and we'll just dive into a few of the facets that make Tasmania so unique and special, and kind of hopefully inspire some more adventures for everyone there. I want to give a shout out to Bev and Jim because I know that you guys have been watching for a while, so thanks for tuning in. So I'm presenting today. I'm currently in Edmonton, Alberta in Canada. I'm on Treaty 6 land, but I am from Australia myself. I do work in both countries, fortunately, and have the pleasure of guiding in both those locations. So this is me. I'm an expedition leader with Natural Habitat Adventures and have been for a few years. Before that, I was a climbing leader and outdoor rec leader for about 10 years. Whenever I'm not guiding, I am a conservation biologist. Just yesterday, I finished my last field shift all across Alberta, working on wetland inventory. So you can see me with my nice muddy boots at the bottom there. So always out and about in it, and really keen to share a little bit of what I know with you. I'm also a keen naturalist, as I know a lot of us here are, climber, as I mentioned, and a big book nerd. So if anyone wants any book recommendations, pretty much every trip I run, I give a little list of relevant books because I love it. I'm also an Aussie slang expert. I'll try and keep it limited so it's a bit more accessible, but if you come visit us down under, you'll know there's quite a lot of slang that's going on. You may notice a couple of words that may not come through in the same way over here in North America, but you might pick up a few cool turn of phrases or three. We'll see how we go. So I want to take you guys down south. I want to take you down under. This is a pretty general map of Australia. So we have 8 states and territories here. We will be focusing down in the south, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of where we are. For natural habitat trips, we do run a trip right along the north coast. We also run a trip on the south coast. We actually extend from Adelaide, which is in the capital of South Australia, across to Victoria and then down into Tasmania. So we'll be exploring just Tasmania in this presentation. I know that Mike's done a few talks on our southern itinerary as well, so you can check out a previous daily dose if you want to dive into some more details there. First thing I want to point out is that Australia is really big. It's as big as the US. There's a lot less going on in the center, especially. So the whole population of Australia is about 25 million people at the moment, which is less than 1/10 of the states. And we still have all of that space. So we are known for our big, broad horizons and sometimes our long drives as well. We try and limit that when we go down and visit, and we focus on some of those key areas where the natural wonders, the biodiversity, and the amazing people are really evident. So we can spend more time on the ground and less time in a vehicle, which is really great. But it's a really diverse nation as well. So this is a map of the Indigenous First Nations of Australia. And as you can see, there are quite a few. And you may also notice there are no straight lines. So we have over 300 different nations across Australia, as well as 800 language groups. So it's a really, really diverse and rich cultural history, as well as a natural history. You can see a lot of these landscapes have really organic shapes. These aren't straight borders either. These would shift and change with the seasons, with people moving with different resources. And it just gives you a bit of an indication of how diverse and broad this area is. So I want to say welcome I'm not here in Australia at the moment, but I want to welcome you guys to exploring Tasmania or lutruwita. So I will be saying lutruwita a lot. That is the palawa kani name for Tasmania, the recognized name for Tasmania. lutruwita. So you can see it's spelt down there in the bottom left-hand side. And the interesting thing about the palawa language here is we don't use capital letters. So this isn't me not typing it up correctly. You'll see even on the road signs that we don't use capital letters down in lutruwita. So I will mix between using Tasmania and lutruwita as we go, but just know that they're the same thing. And I really want to acknowledge the Palawa Kani people of lutruwita. They are generally considered more like one nation now, but originally lutruwita was made up of 9 nations, as well as 48 ancestral groups in 1803. So in 1803, that's when the British settlers came and started their first penal colony down in Tasmania, and that's when it was founded. So it's one of the oldest European settled locations in all of Australia, Hobart being the base of that, which is the capital of Tasmania. But it always was and it always will be Aboriginal land. This is a beautiful piece in the visitor centre of Cradle Mountain National Park, which is one of the places that we visit and something I'll talk about a bit further. And this is done in red ochre. And every time you go, someone will have added a different handprint. So this was taken on my second trip there, and already there was additional handprints. So I'm really excited every single time I go to see how much this wall is growing and how much presence is being put into this place. So it's a really, really nice space. So I want to acknowledge the Palawa Pakana peoples. I want to acknowledge all of the beautiful work that they've done care holding and continuing to share their cultural practices and conservation practices across lutruwita, and the preservation of all of the beautiful species as well as the waterways. And we'll talk a bit about some of the waterways that we get to visit as well. So I want to take us back in time, dive down even further down under as we explore lutruwita. This is just a topographic map of lutruwita. You can see the higher sections in the center. So where it says Mount Ossa, that is the same area that Cradle Mountain is from, and it is the tallest mountain in Tasmania. However, our mountains are not very tall, so it's only 1,500 meters. So it's really not that tall, but it does form this beautiful alpine environment. The center there, you can see these Great Lakes. We call it the Great Lake system. And this is on this raised plateau that extends all the way across lutruwita and then drains into the southeast of the island. You can see down in the corner there, Hobart, and that's where the Derwent River releases. That Derwent River started all the way up in that Great Lake region, and it is a beautiful river that we visit multiple times on our itinerary. We get to touch in with it a few times. It's also where we get to see the platypus and is one of the main kind of lifelines of Tasmania, as well as all of the feeding the agricultural area there as well. Interestingly, it's one of the few rivers that's actually deeper at the start than it is at the end, which is really interesting. So it starts over 90 meters deep in Lake St. Clair, drains all the way through to Hobart, where it's only about 40 meters deep, as it opens up into a really broad river and then estuary out into the sea. So we have a very ancient background here in Australia, and especially down in Tasmania as well. There's a reason it's so unique and so ancient. We separated, if you guys are familiar with the great landmass of Pangaea, the supercontinent, when we were all joined together as one landmass, that then split into 2. So we had Laurasia, which is North America and Europe, and then down south we had Gondwana. So Gondwana, and I will mention Gondwana a couple of times, is the southern supercontinent that split off. Gondwana was made up of South America, it was made up of Australia, Antarctica, and we'll have some linking species that show this Gondwanan history, including these tree ferns that were around well before the dinosaurs were, which is pretty special. So we'll also have a look at some beautiful critters, because let's be real, this is why we all want to be here and look at some cute photos, including Stella. This is Stella over on the right-hand side. She is only a few months old, a little wombat, And we do get to meet some of the young wombats when we go to Bunurong. These guys need cuddles when they're young, and then they start to throw their tantrums in what we call the terrible twos. We also have some unique species. We have a pattymmelon here on the top left, and a red-shouldered or red-necked wallaby just below. So these are both marsupials, sorry, all three are marsupials, and I'll talk a little bit about what makes a marsupial as well. So lots of good stuff to look forward to, and just a general snapshot of diving into lutruwita. So I'm going to get back into some specifics with a bit of a geology talk, just like my co-guide Marlo here, who is showing off some glacial till in that Cradle Mountain area I've been talking about. And so let's have a little look at the history and what is underneath all of this that we're walking in and exploring. The surface geology here you can see is quite a few different things. There's a lot of old sediment layers that have been around for a long time. This primary red band, this is the dolerite. So dolerite is an igneous rock formed from volcanic eruptions, and depending on how it was extruded and how it cooled and how it weathered, we get these really beautiful formations that form. And they can include some pretty stunning structures, including Cradle Mountain and organ pipes, both of which we'll have a look at. It is the largest deposit of dolerite in the world, which I think is pretty incredible. There are little pockets around the rest of the world, but this is where the most of it is. And so we get a lot of unique structures, but around the outside, we have a lot of other things going on. We'll see some granite formations. You see a lot of different sediment mixtures that are happening on the west coast. So the west coast, if I jump back to our big map, the west coast of lutruwita is a really wild place in that, oops, bit too far, in that we actually get a swelling of winds that come from Antarctica. Those winds whip up from Antarctica, we call it the roaring 40s, and they smash into the side. So you can see this mountain range that extends through lutruwita, that is taking the brunt of the force. So if you were ever to go out to Strahan on the side there, or Frenchman's Cap, there's some beautiful walks out there, know that the weather will be both intense and also change very quickly. So you want to keep your wits about you for that one. And then those mountains getting weathered take the brunt of it, and then things start to smooth out on the other side. But we do get a lot of rainfall because lutruwita is so exposed at the bottom of Australia. It means that we're getting a lot of fresh rainfall. So we actually get, it's only 4% of Australia's landmass, and it gets 10% of Australia's freshwater. So a lot of rainfall here really means that we get these beautiful waterfalls, these beautiful rainforest systems, as well as these amazing formations. So here we are at Cradle Mountain. Does anyone have any guesses why it's called Cradle Mountain? You can see that beautiful cradle shape in that formation at the back. You can also see these columnar structures at the back, and that's from that dolerite that's been formed and cooled quite rapidly, but extruded in these pillars. And so this was laid down pre-Jurassic era, and then it was slowly exposed over thousands and thousands of years, over glaciation after glaciation. Big glaciers would form, they'd carve down, and they would expose this really tough dolerite, and we get these crazy formations like Cradle Mountain. So this is Dove Lake. We get to have a little walk around here, the old boat shed. It's a very popular photo spot, and really explore kind of these ancient Alpine landscapes. This is another dolerite formation. So this is what we call the organ pipes, and it's overlooking Nipaluna or Hobart, which is the capital city of Tasmania. And you can see these amazing structures. If you can see, there is a little figure standing in there. That's not me, but I have actually climbed here as well. There is a fair few access routes around that, but rest assured, we can also just take the main road up the other side. So it's a beautiful look over Hobart and a really, really beautiful example of those dolerite formations. We are lucky enough to now, coming into our next season, we are going to be having a First Nations guided walk through this space as well as a little bit of a nice feed. If any of our NatHab regulars know how much we like to feed you, you'll be able to enjoy this view. So moving up a little bit from that bedrock, we still have all of these ancient layers that have really stayed stable within Australia in general, and then also in Tasmania. A lot of this rock hasn't changed in millions of years. We see other instances of this on the mainland, and it just gives us this really interesting snapshot of deep time. As we move through this space, we're able to take in all of the surroundings, and you really feel a sense of how ancient these places are. And I think that's something that is really unique, and I really feel that presence, especially in lutruwita. So this is a lovely trilobite statue made out of beautiful rusted iron. And then we move into these caves as well, which is another one of our beautiful walks that we do on the southern itinerary. And it's one of the most highly decorated caves in the world, and that's because of time. It takes time for each of these little structures to be formed, to calcify, to crystallize, to shift and change and grow into these beautiful formations. So there's something really special about walking through this space and feeling how much time and energy has gone into building this space. So it's definitely something that's worth exploring. And this is just some of the landscapes that we see every single day. We can see this eucalyptus canopy, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and talk about the diversity that's there. And then these really big prominent rock structures that you can see. We don't have these big, aggressive, almost jagged mountains that we see in other parts of the world. Everything is almost like smoothed out, and it's just this solid, stoic standing mountains that have been weathered over such a long period of time. Because since then, geologically, we've been really stable. We don't have a lot of volcanic activity. We don't have many earthquakes. We're right in the center of one of our tectonic plates. So things are just staying just as this is. And it means it's given our species a lot of time to expand and to diversify and to evolve in a way that's really different to the rest of the world. Let's have a look at some of these. So this is an echidna on the top there. And then we also have a little quoll who's being held by Rory at Devils at Cradle, which is one of the Tasmanian devil sanctuaries, which I'll talk about in a bit. But we have some different classes of mammals that we have in lutruwita. We have our placental mammals, that's you and me. So these are mammals and mammals defined being mammals coming from like mammary glands. So we feed our young using milk. That's kind of the main separation. So placental mammals, we have a placenta, we grow our young within us, and they come out more or less ready to face the world. Marsupials and monotremes are different. So they are still mammals, but marsupials have pouches. So they come out underdeveloped, and then they spend some of their growth stage within that pouch. That's when they finish their development. That's when they get their milk from teats within the pouch. And then we have our monotremes, which don't have a pouch either, just like us, but very different. Monotremes are egg-laying mammals, so coming out even less developed than a marsupial or a placental mammal. Our monotremes are coming and being laid in really small eggs that are quite fleshy, almost like a lizard egg or a reptile egg. And then that egg will hatch within the folds of our echidna or a platypus, and then develop from there. And they still have mammary glands, they still produce milk, but they don't have teats in the way that placentals and marsupials do. So super unique, and we'll dive into them a little bit more. But we have so many marsupials. I think marsupials is what we're known for. We have the common kangaroos, we have our wallabies, we have our paddymmelons, and we also have our beautiful wombats as well. So I'll dive into a couple of these. I am also going to do another daily dose just to spook myself straight away. And I'm going to do a bit more of a deep dive into the differences between monotremes, marsupials, and placental mammals, as well as exploring Australia's marsupial assemblage in general. So if you want to check that out, that'll be coming up at the end of August. You can just keep an eye on the daily dose webinar schedule. I think I'm on the 29th. But there's just so much diversity there that I won't dive fully in today, but we'll have a little look at some of these guys. So this is the evolution tree, and we can see here right down at the bottom, we've got monotremes, marsupials, and placentals. So the placentals and the marsupials are more closely related. Monotremes evolved way before on their own. So we're looking at 200 million years ago is when we think they split. We only have the platypus and the echidna. There are a few species of echidna, and there's a few subspecies of echidna. How many depends on who you ask. Last count we had 5 subspecies, but we're really fortunate to have both the platypus and the echidna in Australia and in Lutruwita in Tasmania. So it's an amazing opportunity to see this really unique mammal, this egg-laying mammal that can be really elusive to see otherwise. And they vary a lot. So we can see on the top here, this is a mainland echidna. So these echidnas kind of anteater-esque in that they eat ants, porcupine-esque in that they have spines. They do not have quills. So a porcupine can shed their quills. They're like a feather, they're like a hair. But echidnas, they have spines, and they're actually embedded in a muscle layer. So they have full control over all of their spines, and they can't shoot them out like a porcupine can. So these spines are their primary defense. And we can see in the northern, this is a blondie that I managed to spot in a very also blonde field of just recently harvested hay on Kangaroo Island with Matt, who got this beautiful photo. And you can see that the spines are really long, they're really defined. So if something's going to come along and have a go, all it needs to do is hunker down with its nice strong legs and project all of those spines out, and that's going to try and keep it safe. Down in Tasmania, the climate is a little bit cooler. We were talking about those winds coming from Antarctica, and that means that our echidnas need a little bit more help in staying cool on those cold days, including snow, which I know we're not really expecting Australian to be known for it, which is fair enough. But you can see down below, this is Luigi. So Luigi is one of our echidnas at Bunurong Wildlife Sanctuary down in Tasmania. And you can see the fur is way longer. And there is still fur on Blondie up top, but they kind of swap what's more important, staying warm or being really defended up north and looking more like a rough tussock of grass, I think, in the north, and then down south, keeping nice and snugly within that fur. There's also a nice little she-oak echidna that Matt made when we were talking with Dr. Peggy. So we do get to speak to the world's foremost biologist, echidna biologist Peggy, and she's written everything there is to know about echidnas. She has an Order of Australia for her contribution to that. And it's a really amazing opportunity to learn a lot more about these beautiful, beautiful monotremes. So this is just a couple of differences that we see. In Tasmania, we have some of the largest, most stable populations of echidnas. They can be found anywhere and everywhere. So we are always keeping our eyes peeled every time we're driving along, covering some ground, walking anywhere really. It's one of the first things I would teach you to spot when we're out there looking for this little fuzzy or spiky basketball as we go. Our other monotreme is the platypus. The platypus is probably one of the weirdest animals that we have. I don't know, we have quite a few. So I know that Mike has talked about them a little bit in a previous Daily Dose, so you can check that one out as well. And the platypus, when it was first sent over back to England as a specimen, the biologists over in England thought it was a joke, and they tried to pull it apart to find out where this animal had been stitched together, because it just feels like it shouldn't exist. It is like the body of an otter, it's got the bill of a duck, it's got the tail of a beaver, it's got the electroreceptors of a shark, so it can sense its prey using that bill. And it also has a little bit of venom on the back spur, but only on the males. Males can defend themselves against other males, and they keep this little spur on the back leg. So during mating, if they need to defend territory or if they're going after the same gal, then they can use that spur and it will kind of sedate the other platypus for some time. They don't use it in any other way. They don't use it to attack prey, otherwise the females would have it too. So they're just a very unusual creature. They're also probably one of our most elusive finds. We really try to spend as much time on the rivers as we can to try and spot these. You can see these photos. The bottom photo is a very good photo. They're both quite good. Matt managed to get this on one of our paddles, this top photo, and you're really looking for these 3 little bumps in the water as we look out for these really elusive monotremes. They'll make a little burrow and they'll have their eggs, and then they'll have their young within that burrow, and they'll also spend a lot of their time during the day in that burrow. So we really try and go out at dawn and dusk to spot these guys, but they do need to forage for about 12 hours every day. So there's a lot of food gathering that needs to go on, and they use that bill through the bottom of the riverbeds to pick up small crustaceans, to get some invertebrates like insect larvae throughout the river system, and they use those electroreceptors to pick up anything that's moving and to grab it with their bill. And they do this with their eyes closed. There's just so many little features about the platypus that I absolutely love. And I'm really glad that we actually get to spend some time digging into where they like to hang out on the Derwent River and some of the other subsidiaries of that river. And hopefully you'd be able to go out with this chap, Liam and Fiona. They take us out onto the Derwent River, and it's one of the nicest ways that we can go and see the platypus is being down on their level, being on a nice quiet kayak, and just really keeping our eyes peeled for those 3 little bumps and that little wake moving through. They're really magical to observe. So there are monotremes. They're the 2 species that we get to see down in lutruwita, these crazy unique egg-laying mammals. But there's a few other species that we have the fortune to see, except for this fella, unfortunately. I think when I say Tasmania, a lot of people ask me about the Tasmanian tiger, and it's one of those sort of mythical creatures that when you're not in the area, you're not quite sure it's something that an Australian made up just to have a bit of a laugh, which we like to do, or what the actual story was. So this is the thylacine. The thylacine is also a marsupial mammal, so they have a pouch, and it's a dasyurid, which is a whole class of marsupials. You can see a little bit of the evolution tree if you're interested on the bottom there. And the Tasmanian tiger, or thylacine, was one of the dominant predators in Tasmania, but it was also in the mainland of Australia. It had a really important role as being one of those apex predators. However, about 3,500 years ago, they moved off the mainland and their only stronghold was down in Tasmania. We currently think that's because of the introduction of the dingoes, which have now become a naturalized predator. So the dingoes are not native in that true sense, but they've been there for about 4,000 years, and they have become that apex predator on the mainland. They hold a really important role in maintaining diversity on the mainland. So the Tasmanian tiger then was restricted to Tasmania, hence where it gets its name. I think the tiger part is obvious as well. So unfortunately, with the introduction of the settlers from Europe, a lot of sheep grazing that started going on, the Tasmanian tiger was seen as a threat. And unfortunately, a lot of them were hunted to extinction. And the last one, which some of these guys here, the last one died in captivity in 1936 in the zoo. And it's just an example of a real shame of loss of biodiversity that we've had in Australia and also in other places in the world. And we've really felt the effects of that since that. So there's been a lot of effort on maintaining diversity within Tasmania and within Australia, especially with the introduction of invasive species like foxes and cats, as well as human behavior. So this was a really quite scary lesson for a lot of us to learn, losing the thylacine, and we don't want that to happen again. So another Tasmanian icon you may have heard of is the Tasmanian devil. This is a lovely devil at Devils at Cradle who is looking very cute and a little bit sleepy in one of their nighttime feedings. And we do have the Tasmanian devil. They are still around. They also are part of that predator story and are really important at maintaining balance within the Tasmanian ecosystem. The Tasmanian devil faced the same pressures as the Tasmanian tiger. So when the Tasmanian tigers were being hunted, blamed for the loss of sheep, even though we're now seeing that it was also just poor farming practices when a bunch of convicts were told to look after a farm with no sheep experience. So we had a huge reduction in the number of Tasmanian devils. Their population was greatly reduced. About 90% of the population was reduced in that early 1900s period. With that reduced population, unfortunately, it left them susceptible to a disease that I'm sure some of you have heard of, which is called the devil facial tumor disease. So it is a tumor that they get on their face, but it is a cancer, and it is a contagious cancer. So a lot of people around the world are very invested in understanding how this works, because it's the only contagious cancer that we have, as well as ensuring that we have a stable population of devils that we can then release. One of the places we get to visit, which I absolutely love every single time, is Devils at Cradle. And they focus on carnivorous mammals, and they focus on conserving them and making sure there's a stable population of devils so that we can release them when it is safe to do so. With the disease that's contagious, it's hard to do releases, then they may just catch it again. However, we are now starting to see a natural resistance develop in devils in the northwest population, which is so exciting. And we also are getting positive results from a new vaccine developed actually from our COVID vaccines. AstraZeneca's method has been working to counteract facial tumor disease in devils, and it's been really, really successful. So over the next 3 to 5 years, we should be seeing that roll out, and then we should be able to see those devils return to the wild and take their place in that really important predator role in our ecosystem. Devils at Cradle also have another creature that we get to have a look at, which is the eastern quoll, and I feel like are not talked about as much, but should be, because they're absolutely beautiful. But the eastern quoll are actually lower in numbers, and they're critically endangered. They were all over the mainland of Australia, and now their only stronghold is here in Tasmania. And they are part of the rewilding effort that the World Wildlife Fund has been doing in Australia. So we're seeing releases in Tasmania, and we're seeing releases in Jervis Bay as well. And it's really nice to start seeing those numbers come back up. We had a few losses in Jervis Bay, unfortunately, but now the population, we're starting to see young come through, which is really exciting. So it's really amazing to be part of that effort. And every time we do a trip with Natural Habitat Adventures, we're directly contributing to this as we donate through to our partners at WWF. And it's just amazing to see the work that they're doing on the front lines. Here we have some other little critters. These are our wallabies, and you can have coffee with them in the morning, which is really lovely. This is back up at Cradle Mountain, and you can see this beautiful ancient landscape that I have mentioned. This is that Arctic landscape. So you can see trees are greatly reduced, and we have this beautiful open moorland. This moorland is really unique in itself. Within this one biome, up in the Arctic, up in the Alpine, I'm getting into my polar bear brain already, is 272 different species of plants here. And it's crazy how diverse this area is. A third of those species are only found in Tasmania. That's the only place that you'll see them, including this ancient pandani tree, which is absolutely beautiful. We also have this button grass. You can see their little button seed heads. They are a nitrogen fixing plant that kind of dominate this Tasmanian landscape. You'll often see it's very kind of emblematic of Tasmania, this beautiful kind of rusty colored grass and these beautiful rounded tussocks. And they have the lowest phosphorus of any plant in the world, which I just think is incredible. For any gardeners out there, I think you know how important phosphorus is for growing plants. And these guys just don't have much of it, but they're able to dominate this landscape. And I think that's really beautiful. So these are just some of the little plants that we see. Including grazing on this sort of grassland are our little wombats. Wombats are, I say little, they're relatively large. They are a ton of muscle, not a literal ton, but they are a lot of muscle, a lot of bone, and a lot of strength. They are sturdy, hardy creatures, but they're also just sweet herbivores. Their main prerogative in life is to go around and graze, and then they build these beautiful burrowing systems where they can hide if they need to. They have a nice hard plate on their back that they can use as a defense. So if it's feeling threatened or a little bit scared, it will turn its backside to you. That's a gesture for us to move away, but also it knows it's protected by that, which is pretty special. They also, fun fact, here's me demonstrating, they poop out in cubes, and this is functionally important so that they can actually maintain where those piles of poo are going to be so that they can mark their territory. So nice little example of the fact that you can fit a square peg out of a round hole. And so that's because the way that their intestines are designed, they have hard walls on the side. They form these cube shapes to make sure that where they go, it stays put. This is one of our pademelons. Again, another example. These are like a little wallaby, just a different species, a little bit smaller and just absolutely adorable. Another one of our little marsupials. And here we have a kookaburra sitting in the old gum tree. If you know the old nursery rhyme, kookaburras are actually introduced to lutruwita. So we do see quite a few, and they are beautiful, laughing chorus in the morning, but they are a little bit of a problem at the moment. So we do like to see them up on the mainland, but we are using some controls to help our other native bird species. So we have 12 endemic bird species in Tasmania, of which I think my best bird watching group, we've seen 10 on a trip. So we're really trying. I want to do a trip where we find all 12. I'm really trying. But sitting on the old gum tree, these are our eucalyptus. They're ridiculously diverse. There's over 700 species, all of which with numerous subspecies, and they're also called eucalypts, eucs gums. I will be doing one of my talks on eucalyptus, as well as the eucalyptus loving animal, the koala. So that'll be coming up in September, and I'll deep dive a little bit more into eucalyptus, the amazing adaptations that they have. But we do see a few when we go, and they are absolutely stunning. On the right, we have some regrowth after fire, and you'll see that's kind of like the ornamental leaves that we use in flower arranging. If you have seen that, that's made it over here quite a lot, and as well as some really beautiful showy blooms as well. We get to visit the Eucalyptus regnans, regnans meaning regal, reign, so we call them the king of the forest, and this is the tallest flowering plant in the world. The tallest one we have at the moment is called Centurion. He is 102 meters tall, and the tallest on record we've had is 114 meters. So absolute giants. And we get to walk through this beautiful forest in Mountfield National Park and really admire the majesty of the Eucalyptus regnans. They're also called a Tasmanian oak. They're not an oak. They're also called a mountain ash. They're not an ash. It's a common thing with common names down here, but Eucalyptus regnans, absolutely beautiful. We also have some other ancient giants. This is the Huon pine. We have individuals as old as 2,000 years. We don't often go to this habitat on our southern itinerary, but we do visit the King Billy pines, which are nearly as old, the oldest on record being 1,700 years old as an individual tree. However, the Huon pine can also reproduce just through vegetation, so just little like root suckers. And so we have an individual genetically the same that is 10,000 years old. And I think that's just incredible. And that really shows the age that we have in Tasmania, in this ancient, ancient world. These are the tree ferns I mentioned as well. Absolutely beautiful, slow growing giants. I think one of my favorite trees ever. I have a lot of favorite trees, however. So they were around before the dinosaurs. We're talking 250 to 200 million years ago. It gives you this really old prehistoric sense as you walk through. And they have these crazy slow growth forms as they meander through the forest. This one's probably my favorite. That had a little bit of a stumble in its early days. and it just keeps plodding on. We also have a root of another tree growing and using the base of that tree fern as a growing medium. So if you have ever, I'm clearly a gardener, but if you've ever tried to grow like orchids or anything like that, sometimes you can use the stumps of tree ferns as a natural growing medium for other epiphytes to attach and grow. So when we walk through these forests, they're just so green of everything living off this one ancient giant. So that's just a snapshot of some of the older species that we have, some of the unique animal species that we have, and some of the ancient geology that we have in Tasmania. There is also a huge cultural diversity that happens. We go to the main town on the harbour side. You may catch it on the weekend where we have Salamanca markets. The top right is where we stay now, right on the waterfront. So it gives you a bit of opportunity to explore this amazing state. Lutruwita is a beautiful, slow pace, welcoming community. I was in trouble from Sylvie, who's one of our operators down there, for running because she said in Tasmania we do not run. It is a very relaxed pace and it's absolutely lovely. It's such a beautiful space. And so we get the opportunity to meet a lot of locals. We go to local berry farms. One trip, we were just going about our day getting our ice cream, and the local beekeepers were stopping by to get their ice cream, and they allowed us to try their local honey. So that was a really beautiful moment, and something that is not uncommon in Tasmania is all of these amazing local interactions. People are really proud to be from Tasmania and to share their life with you. You can see some of the hops harvest that we see for any of the beer lovers out there. Most of Australian hops are grown in this area near New Norfolk, where we also stay. So there's a lot to see in Tasmania. There's a lot to dive into, and I hope I've given you just a little bit of a snapshot into what that looks like. And I hope that you'll join us there next time. I would love to deep dive further with you if you want to learn more about monotremes and marsupials, as well as eucalyptus, and any other suggestions you have. I've got a few more webinars coming up, but I hope I could give you a little bit of a snapshot into what it's all about down under. And I'll see you guys on our next adventure. So thank you. Here are
Nikki,
some obligatory backs of animal shots that we do. I think every Nat Hub guide has some back end of some animal.
Nikki, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Before we start the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone that they can submit their questions via the questions field in the control panel. But we have some themes going on already. There were several questions about the Tasmanian tiger. Mm-hmm. Do you know if there's any effort to use DNA of specimens in museums to recreate the Tasmanian tiger?
Yeah, there are. It's definitely one of the ones that is high on the short list for trying to bring back a species, because we do have complete DNA specimens. So the last one that died in captivity, we have. So the genetics are there, they're relatively recent. The rest of the ecosystem hasn't changed too much that we would be more confident we could bring them back. And there have been talks about who would be a good surrogate for bringing back the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger. It depends who you ask on whether or not it's going to come back. I know the professor at my university, at University of New South Wales, Mike Archer, is one of the vocal voices really advocating for bringing back the Tasmanian tiger, because they did just have such an important role in our ecosystem. The other concern is, are we ready to have them back? Are we going to have the same pressures that they faced last time? I like to think that we've changed a lot since then, especially in terms of predator management in agricultural areas. So yeah, I don't know, watch this space, might happen.
That is fascinating, a very fascinating possibility.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the best time of year to experience the most animal activity? I know this is a kind of a trick question, but how would you respond?
To experience the most? Wow. Any time is fine. Like in Australia in general, we have more of a wet, dry season up north, and then down south it gets a bit more temperate, but it's still not too seasonal. We have longer systems that aren't based on 1 year that we call boom and bust systems. So we'll have long periods of drought, and then we'll have long periods of heavy rainfall where we'll get flooding, which we have seen recently. And so our animals, especially our marsupials, are really adapted to thriving when those conditions are good. So at the moment we have had a lot of rainfall and everything should be breeding up really, really effectively. So for example, our kangaroos, like the one here on screen, they can have a embryo in their uterus on pause for up to 7 years. They can then have a pouch in the young developing, a young in the pouch developing, and they can have a young at foot. So they can have 3 separate generations on the go at one time. So when the conditions are good, everything is out. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. So it's not really like an annual cycle. I think mainly for humans, it's about what climate you like. The nice thing about down south in Tasmania is quite a mild climate, but it can get really hot in summer or it can get really rainy. So really these guys are out all the time. They're crepuscular, so they're dawn and dusk. So there's not as many nocturnal animals, except for the devils, which we get to see ourselves at Devils at Cradle anyway. So really I love it there that I can see anything at any time. It's amazing. Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the differences between a platypus in Tasmania and ones you might find in northern Queensland?
Okay, yeah. I don't know as many specifics as I do for echidnas, but I know, having seen a couple on both, they are relatively similar. I would imagine that we're going to get a bit of a size difference in local systems based on their diet availability. But in terms of like obvious morphological differences, we're not seeing the same difference that we see with echidnas with their fur coat. We may see longer fur down south, but I'm not sure. Unfortunately, we don't have a Dr. Peggy that we do for echidnas that we need for a platypus. So if anyone wants to get into platypus studies, we need a lot more information. We don't have a good population estimate at the moment. There's still a lot more to learn about how they reproduce and their behavior as well. But from all the platypus that I've seen and images that I've seen as well, they are iconically that same platypus shape, and they have persisted for a long time. We presume that the echidna actually stemmed from a platypus descendant when monotremes were diversifying. So the platypus has got it pretty dialed in, and they don't need to change themselves that much. So yeah.
Are there crocodiles in Tasmania?
There are not, so you can go swimming whenever you want. We have plenty of other things that, you know, may be a little bit risky, but they're really not. Crocodiles as well up north, you're using common sense, you're in their space, things are well signposted. We're obviously not going to take you anywhere that's dangerous. They're just beautiful to watch. And yeah, down south we have a lot more smaller animals just due to the climate being a little bit cooler. No crocs to worry about at all.
Sounds good. So then are Tasmanian devils the only predators on the island?
No, there are quite a few predators. We will have other reptiles. We have a beautiful population of tiger snakes that can vary in color quite dramatically. They're beautiful. We have quite a few snakes that kind of fill that predator role on the ground, as well as some lizards, some bigger monitors. The devils are more scavengers, but they really are an important part of that ecosystem in breaking down. They can eat through bone, they can eat through anything. So they're really important for breaking down a lot of animals that may be hunted more actively by other predators. And they're quite slow. They can only run up to about, I don't know, 20 kilometers per hour, kind of, if they're really, really trying for a short amount of time, compared to some of our other stuff that's a little bit more of a keen hunter. So the quolls that I talked about, they will actively hunt a lot more. They're also an important predator. We also have our wedge-tailed eagle, which I didn't put a photo in, but they're absolutely beautiful, and we definitely see them quite often in Tasmania. This large eagle with this beautiful diamond wedge-shaped tail, and they're a really important hunter. They will take down a paddy melon, which is those little wallabies I showed you, no problems. Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a technical one. I don't expect you to have an answer, but it's an interesting question. Is there any evidence that the devil, the Tasmanian devil facial tumor is related to an HPV type virus, since that can cause cancers that are spread contagiously?
I am not confident enough to answer. I did look up the virus type. There is a really good, like the Wikipedia page of the facial tumor disease has been really, really well updated. And I know that people from Devils at Cradle and Bunurong have been like adding resources as well. That does talk about the specific virus type that is the facial tumor disease. And I haven't brushed up on it since I was last there, so I'm sorry, I'm not really sure on that one. But they have classified the virus type, and they have been using that to make sure that any of the vaccines are going to be effective. And then also, if we can learn about the transmission and mutation possibilities in cancerous type cells, so we can learn more about if another contagious cancer cell develops, we know a lot more about it. So a lot of research funding is going into understanding this. And I would definitely recommend a bit more reading. I'll do some more straight after this as well. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. It's an interesting question for sure.
It's so interesting.
Are the wild animals in Tasmania accustomed to human interactions?
It depends where you go. It depends on the animal. I think it's the same kind of the world over. There'll be areas where animals may be a bit more habituated, just, you know, like in obvious parks or like in urban areas. Like we definitely, it's not a stereotype to say that we have kangaroos in our backyard, because they will just come through. You've got a nice lawn, it's going to graze on it. We have a lot of herbivores that are perfectly happy to hang around humans. We have possums who like to forage through your bin a little bit like a raccoon. So we do have a few animals that are used to people, but generally they will try and stick to themselves. And I think it's good that there should be a bit of distance and there should be a bit of skittishness. Yeah, especially with like roads and cars, a lot of animals are starting to learn, but there's also a lot of initiatives to make sure that the roads are safe for critters on the road as well. So we've got a lot more wildlife bridges or wildlife tunnels, as well as just a lot more awareness. So whenever we're on tour, we really try to never drive at dawn or dusk, because that's when, as I was saying, our crepuscular animals are going to be out. It's really important we stay off the roads during those high traffic, not for us times. And we try to do that on our tours as well. But there's definitely times where you can get really up close with animals, mainly at Bunurong, which is basically like all of the animals there. It's a rehab center, but the animals that are on display are animals that are unable to be released into the wild due to whatever reason, usually related to their injury. So it's kind of like a glorified retirement home for a lot of Australian species, and it does mean that we can use them for ambassadorship and go and cuddle up with baby Stella and baby Madge, our little baby wombats, because they need it. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Are there predatory birds like eagles or hawks in Tasmania?
We have quite a few different predatory birds. The wedge-tailed eagle I mentioned is definitely the top dog. They are very large. I don't have an exact height, but I would imagine they're standing close to a meter tall. Yeah, they're big. And we have a few other hawks. We have falcons. There are peregrine falcons. There are quite a few different kites as well. So we have quite a diverse array of raptors. The wedge-tailed eagle is found on the mainland, but there's a Tasmanian subspecies that's only found there. But we also have some smaller birds. So we have like kingfishers. Our kookaburra is a kingfisher, and it is posing a bit of a threat because it's very good at what it does. But we'll also have butcher birds, which is a whole clade of birds that will eat meat, they will eat eggs from other nests, they will eat small lizards and little mice and small marsupials. So our magpie, which is not the North American magpie or the European magpie, is a butcher bird, so it looks quite different, and they will also eat up some little critters. So there is quite a large assemblage of predatory birds.
Mm. Nikki, thanks again for presenting to us today and sharing your passion and knowledge about Tasmania. I want to turn it back to you for any closing comments.
I just want to thank you guys for listening in with me. I hope I've inspired you to have a little look at the full ecosystem that you're in. There's so many cool, obviously animals, but our plants are really unique. And then the geology as well just really builds up this whole picture of what can make a place so unique. And I think we can look a little bit deeper in our own backyard every single time. I really hope to see you guys in Australia. I know it's a long way, but it's definitely worth the trip. Yeah, and I'll see you guys over the next couple of months as well.
Sounds good. I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Please join us again tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.